What's up, you guys? Scott here. So in today's video, I want to talk about one of my favorite, I guess we could say, like suggestions for a very quick trance. Now, this wasn't necessarily a question that I had emailed to me, but I do get asked this a lot in passing. So when it comes to therapy, when it comes to hypnotherapy, coaching, whatever it is, we all know that a client's problem is unconscious, because if it was conscious, they'd be able to solve their own problem. So when a client comes to see us or books us in as their therapist or a coach, we know that they're giving us their best guess as to what they think the problem is, because how couldn't they just give us their guess? If their problem is unconscious, they need a therapist or a coach to explore that conscious thinking to find out what the real problem is unconscious. So when it comes to my favorite suggestion for trance, it was actually the only question and the very first question that was most important to set the frame for the entire session. And what this is, yeah, sure, my background is helping people quit smoking, but remember that's a symptom, even though they're coming in for stop smoking, I'm working with all the other things behind that problem. Thus, the smoking sort of takes care of itself. So regardless of the client, regardless of the problem, regardless of who they are, regardless of their background, it doesn't really matter. As soon as a client would sit down in front of me, I've done the strategy session, they booked in, I became their therapist. They sit down in front of me and I ask this one question every time. And it's my favorite question. And it's the easiest question to ask that will actually induce a trance. And that question is, what's the problem? So there's no hypnotic language. It's not even a hypnotic suggestion. So what am I talking about here? So what this is when I'm asking a client what their problem is, the first thing they're going to tell me is their best guess. They're going to tell me their conscious assumption about what's happening in their life and their problem unconsciously. And from this sparks an actual trance. So how does this work? When it comes to asking a client what their problem is, and they give us some sort of conscious fluff, some sort of conscious regurgitation of information, I'm going to ask a follow-up question based on the response of the first question. And I'm going to keep following that, because what I'm ultimately doing is not only am I trying to find out what the symptom problem is, I'm actually eliciting that trance. Why? Because if a client's real problem is unconscious and I'm asking them about the problem, which is unconscious, they actually have to go into a little mini or small trance to retrieve that information. So this is sort of how it looks. I ask the client what their problem is, and they'll say, well, Scott, I want to quit smoking. So from that response, I might say something like, well, how is this a problem for you? From there, they have to go back into their mind, retrieve some information, give me that information. I'm then going to ask another question based on the response they give me, which will have them go back into trance or back into their unconscious to retrieve more information. And this is almost like an Ericksonian fractionation approach. I'm actually doing two things at once here. I'm trying to find out what is the real problem so I know what to fix, because smoking is the symptom, but I'm also eliciting that trance. So, in more advanced terms, this is known as spotting unconscious moments. But what I'm basically looking for as my client retrieves that information, it's actually going to be a mixture of conscious and unconscious information. And it's my job as a therapist to filter away their conscious assumptions or their conscious information and listen for the unconscious information, to be spotting those unconscious moments. Why do I want to do this? Well, as responses start coming out and I'm looking for those unconscious responses, I'm going to ask a question based on the unconscious part of that response, and I'm going to delete the conscious stuff. Now, it sounds a little bit finicky and it sounds a little bit hard to do, but it's actually the most powerful thing you guys can actually learn to do as a therapist or a coach. So thus, if my client's giving me a response that's full of conscious and unconscious information, and I ask a follow-up question based on the unconscious part of that information, they're going to go deeper into trance to retrieve more information. Thus, that fractionation is going to take them deeper and deeper and deeper as a metaphor into trance, to the point where my clients will look at me. They can no longer answer my questions. They can no longer look for or retrieve any unconscious information, because they're that tranced out. And usually at this time, their eyes closed or they just sit in that sort of trance place. And that's all the wonderful therapy and the suggestions and all the stories and metaphors that you can use to, solve your client's problem to an extent. That's when all that wonderful stuff can take place. So my favorite question, which elicits a trance, but it also finds out what the real symptom is just by asking a client, what's your problem? And it can be framed in any way. It can be framed in, what do you want to work on today? What's your problem? Tell me about what's been troubling you. It doesn't really matter. What we do want to avoid is assuming that because our client's coming in for smoking, we don't want to get tied in that this is the symptom thing. You also don't want to make assumptions that you know where all problems stem for. Here, a lot of therapists and coaches say, well, Scott, all problems stem from anxiety. So I'm just going to fix the anxiety and the symptom will take care of itself. But all you're doing at this point is guessing. This is something that cannot be proven. And you don't want to go into a session with these assumptions, because now you're going to try and steer the client towards the techniques and the strategies that you have pre-prepared. And this is not a good way to do therapy and coaching. So the easiest way to get into a trance and do the therapy at the same time, start with your clients, start with the initial part of your client's research phase or information phase, which is, what's the problem? Wait for a response. Ask a question based on the response they give you, not some list of a magical 10 questions that you've downloaded from the internet. Ask a follow-up question to that response, and then start to look for what is conscious information and what is unconscious information. And this will not only help your clients resolve their problems very quickly, but it will elicit a trance very quickly as well. So that's it for today, guys. See you on the next question.